welcome to Weather and Ag in Focus on this Monday, April Fool's Day. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Chief Meteorologist Dean Wysocki alongside with our wonderful, talented Ag Director, Bridgette Readel, and our super meteorologist, Justin Storm.
I got a new title this week.
Meteorologist extraordinaire, Justin Storm. Since you're Chief Dean, he gets to be extraordinaire.
That or super, one or the other. Either one works. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend. It's temperatures out there not too bad for this time of the year. Most everybody in the 40s. We're seeing a little more sunshine poke into the FM area. Temperatures at 41 degrees and a little bit of a breeze, but not much. A very light wind out of the north. And so we're going to continue with light winds today and eventually seeing a little more sunshine. And then we're looking at even warmer temperatures as we head towards the end of the week and into the upcoming weekend. More on that coming up a little bit later. But just not a bad-looking forecast. I was just commenting on our social media pages that the next 2 weeks around here looks pretty dry. Doesn't mean we won't see any precip, but the main storm track is to our south, and that's okay. Areas of the Central Plains need the moisture as well, but we've got to get some up here pretty soon. I mean, it's not going to be too long down the pipeline here before we need to start getting out in the field.
Soon enough, because as we work with our farmers where we're planting corn this year. And again, thank you to Trygve Skolnes, his son Parker, and son-in-law Justin Magnuson. They're our farm cooperators. We'll be north of Glendon. So we're not only switching from soybeans to corn, but also North Dakota to Minnesota and what that might bring to us. But it's a little too soon to be planting yet, but it will probably happen in the month of April. That's the goal. And I know they're going to request you guys give it all of its best effort.
I'm ready to start planting. I'm going to get out there with the flamethrower. I'm going to start heating up the ground so I can throw my plants in there and then just put a little dome over them for a couple weeks.
Well, it's a good
it's
try.
work out swimmingly.
I don't see anything going wrong with
that. In your
that.
small spot in the world?
No, not at all.
In your small spot in the world, you might. That'd be okay. Yeah.
Put some heaters, some heating tubes straight into the ground so that way it just stays like 60 degrees year round.
I'm so glad it's April Fool's Day so people can listen to this and just think he's not really saying the right thing. So there.
Oh, I'm not kidding.
That's every day. Are you kidding me?
You know, like those heated driveways where they run the heated floors where they run the hot water through to keep it nice and warm? Yeah, we're going to do that in the garden.
That's perfect, right? You're going to have floor heat. Yep, but the big runs
soil
underneath
heat
that are tied to your rebar. Nice. Nice try.
Right.
Okay, so you said it's going to be nice, though, this week. And for those of us who have to be traveling places, I'd like to make sure that it is, gentlemen. What you got for me?
Where are you traveling?
Going west of Bismarck tomorrow.
You're fine.
I'll be out in... Oh, good. I'll be in Killdeer, North Dakota tomorrow night. I have been invited to speak to the Killdeer FFA chapter banquet. I'm very much looking forward to that trip.
Nice. Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, the weather looks pretty nice for the rest of the week. We're looking at generally increasing sunshine as we head throughout the rest of the week. There's going to be a storm system currently passing through South Dakota, bringing them some rain and snow. That will be going into the Great Lakes and wrapping in some really chilly weather for the Great Lakes area. But in fact, areas of Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, going to be getting some pretty decent snow as we head into tomorrow and Wednesday. Thankfully, they can have that snow while we will see increasing sunshine. And temperatures warming today to around 50. And we'll be right in that general range for Tuesday and Wednesday as well, with the temps right around 50 and pretty much breezier conditions Tuesday, Wednesday, but then we'll warm things up a little further towards the end of the week, and by the weekend, we should be pretty close to 60 degrees, or maybe a little warmer, but it's going to be windy. And we were talking about this earlier, Bridgette, that the top part of the topsoil, it's so dry that if we get winds gusting 30, 40 miles an hour, we're going to be dealing with that blowing dirt, blowing dust, and yeah, that's just going to be
nobody wants that much dust blowing around. It's reminiscent of the Dust Bowl years for some of our listeners. It's for others, they just don't want the dust and dirt in their homes, that type of thing. But most importantly, that's soil erosion. And then we start to see those pileups of our topsoil in the ditches. Now, here in the Red River Valley, we have feet of topsoil. We are a glacial lake bed, and we have plenty to go around, except when it starts to blow like that. We don't want to see that being the case. We want to see our soil stay in place so we always have plenty of topsoil to work with. It's also important to note that in years past, such as 21 and 22, in those really dry springs, we did have a concern where, as that topsoil blew, if you had done a fall treatment of a herbicide, could enough of your soil particles with treatment on them move that could affect a non-target crop? So for instance, if you had put down a pre-emerge for your corn and it suddenly landed in a field that was going to be sugar beets, could that cause herbicide injury? I don't think that's going to be the case. Normally, we don't see enough of those particles move. My greater concern is with the drier weather we've had. I mean, we did get some fall rainfall, but when we have no-till situations where we leave stubble on the field, that with the drier situation we're in right now, that plant material hasn't broken down as it normally would, and that may carry over some herbicide from last year to this year. So I think it's a good idea for folks to keep that in mind. Double check your rotational restrictions, because it tells you how many months you have to go from the application within one crop to another. But then also you can sometimes have rainfall that matters as well. Do you have to have a minimum of 5, 8, 10 inches of rainfall prior to being able to plant your next sensitive crop? I hope that all made sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I followed
There you
along.
go. Stuff you didn't know.
A lot of stuff I didn't
appreciate
know.
that. I didn't even have to draw stick figures. I think this is a great win. You didn't have to draw them for me either.
Yeah.
Not today
Have a
yet.
good day.
We still got a lot of show left,
Yeah, the
though.
day's not done yet.
That's true. Y'all have to draw a stick figure for me. So days like Friday, where for whatever reason between Holton, Kansas and Topeka, my signal just kept dropping. And you'd have thought if you're that close to Topeka, things would have been fine, but no, it was not. So here we are now, live and ready.
There we go. Yeah, Friday was just kind of a cluster. We had all sorts of stuff that was failing and going wrong the entire show. And after the show, I think a couple of things were going a little haywire as well.
Well,
So
I think
hopefully we got most of
all
those
balanced.
bugs figured out. Let's see. Well, we got some fun things coming up on the show for the rest of this hour. We'll have a guest from Land O'Lakes. That's Kyle Gustafson. He'll be joining us at the 120 segment. And if you want to call in with questions during that, give us a call on the Red Wing Shoes phone line. That's 701-293-9000. Emails to the program are weatherorag@flagfamily.com, and Bridgette's personal phone will also accept those questions. Ag topics we got going on for this afternoon. Some potential tax implications for farmers, as well as Anheuser-Busch is getting farmland certification. So we'll touch a little bit on those two. And if we get time, we'll talk about some products of the United States, rules that are going into effect. So those are the three topics we'll try to cover this afternoon. And again, like I said, if you got any questions, feel free to call us at any point during the show, whether it's about weather or any of our ag topics or our guest. And I suppose, why don't we just dive into one of those ag topics right away, and let's talk about Anheuser-Busch. What do they got going on with their farmland certification, Bridgette?
Somehow I knew you were going to pick anything related to beer, Justin.
Anything with beer. Mm-hmm.
And no
I
one's
got an
surprised.
itch.
None whatsoever. No, you have a thirst, that more than anything.
Yeah, the thirst is
All
giving
right.
me an itch.
All right, American Farmland Trust. They are a nonprofit organization that looks to help keep American farmers on their land. And they've launched a new U.S. farm certification. This puts a seal on packaging for products that derive at least 95% of their agricultural ingredients from farms in the U.S. First company to step up to be a part of this certification is indeed Anheuser-Busch. So as we get into the month of May, you will see Busch Light cans, Budweiser, Bud Light, and Michelob Ultra having this certification on it that 95% of their product was derived from U.S. agricultural products. And there'll be more to join over time. I was asked earlier today if that means other brewers such as Coors or Miller are going to be jumping on the bandwagon of that certification. They may, but I don't have a list of who's going to be joining it next. What I do have, though, is quite the statistic I want you guys to digest. Part of the reason that American Farmland Trust is so busy with their certification right now, they really want to help promote American agriculture in any way possible. Within the next 15 years, okay, so here are the numbers. In the next 15 years, 30% of our nation's ag land will transition from current farmers to the next generation. A third of it. That's a big chunk of land on the move.
Wow.
So
sure is.
they're potential guests for us down the road, but at least we know right now what they're doing in their work to promote made in the USA products, etc. This is a voluntary labeling, by the way.
I would think that's a win-win for their marketing, especially the marketing disaster that Anheuser-Busch, has been through over the last 6 months to a year. I think this would be a genius marketing tool, not only for them but for the other brands as well.
Well, when you think of beer, because some of our favorite things here, beef and beer, we do like to talk about them. When you think of beer, Anheuser-Busch really does come to mind, not so much for the debacle that happened with Bud Light earlier this year in some folks' minds, but really the Budweiser Clydesdales. If you want to talk about a symbol of American agriculture and one of our industries that we promote, which of course would be brewing, those Clydesdales really come to mind. And they are literally the show ponies that are at fairs, conventions, and so forth. They did have a situation last year where one of the hitches, that's the 8 Clydesdales pulling the wagon, the 2 middle sets of horses got tangled up. But you should see the video for that. It happened at a rodeo. The announcer was great to get everybody to just quiet down, to not frighten the animals. They had about 15 trainers that went out to help, and one by one, they kept the animals calm. They disentangled them. They unhooked the wagon and backed it up. They took the front set of horses out, moved the back ones away, and were able to disentangle those 2 sets in the center without anybody being hurt. It was really great to watch. They're so good with those animals. Really important to see.
Cool.
So we'll hear more about those guys a little bit later as we talk about other Made in the USA labeling. But before we get to that, we're going to have a little refresher course on adjuvants with Kyle Gustafon from Land O'Lakes. He's down in the Volga, South Dakota area. I'm looking forward to visiting with Kyle. I hope you are too. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Weather and Ag in Focus. And welcome back to Weather and Ag in Focus. Thank you for joining us today. Ooh, we had another topic come in from a listener while we were on our break right there. We're going to talk a little bit later about bird flu in cows. No, that doesn't make you fly and it doesn't affect your milk. So I'm just going to knock those down right off the bat. You guys disappointed I did that?
Man,
Well-
I could really go for flying right around now.
that
Huh.
I've seen how you drive. I wouldn't even trust how you fly, man.
Oh man, I'm a great pilot. You should come up with me sometime.
No chance.
We'll go fly around
you
the
guys.
valley.
No.
I'm just here to
Landing's
crush your
the only
hopes and
part that's
dreams
hard.
and just here to crush your hopes and dreams, and thankfully I've been able to do it on an everyday basis. You're welcome. Now,
Oh.
to our guest today, Kyle Gustafon is joining us. Kyle is in South Dakota, East Central South Dakota, actually. He also has been an employee with Land O'Lakes, and he is an adjuvant guru. So, if I were able to say, what's an adjuvant? Well, Kyle, how would you like to describe that for us, if you could, please?
Yeah, so when I think about an adjuvant is anything that you add to the spray tank that's not an active ingredient. So you think of glyphosate or glufosinate or 2,4-D. Those are herbicides that have active ingredients. The adjuvant is something that you would add to the tank that basically it enhances the activity of your active ingredients to make them better, to get better uptake, to reduce drift, to make mixability better. But it's a wide definition, but the simple thing that we do is they're added to the spray tank to make the active ingredients that you're spraying more effective.
So you and I, this is a pretty familiar language. And I know that for Justin and Dean, you guys, please ask all the questions in case this maybe doesn't make as much sense to you as it does to us. So we definitely want to do that. And it feels like as we get closer to spring, maybe it's time to do some reminders for those who are listening, as for our farmers who are going to be spraying and applying. What comes to mind, Kyle? What have probably been the biggest couple of talking points you've had this winter as you've visited with custom applicators and farmers?
When I think about spray applications and I think about adjuvants, probably the one thing that I always have to remember myself about spray adjuvants is that they are most effective when you're applying pesticides under less than perfect weather conditions. So, I'm thinking about like warm, dry conditions or cool, wet conditions. And a lot of times when we jump to, well, what do you need to use for adjuvants? I think probably the first thing we think of is maybe using like AMS with Liberty, for example, or AMS with glyphosate in season. But a lot of times it's our first crack at getting some of these weeds sprayed early in the season. That's when we have some of the best responses out of adjuvants. So like when I think of, cool, wet conditions like what we're going to experience here over the next month, that's a lot of times where you see some of the best responses out of adjuvants, the AMSs, the oil adjuvants. Because under those conditions, you might have an afternoon where it's 70, 80 degrees and sunny one day. And then, as you know, the next day it might only be 40 to 50 degrees and it's cloudy, but you've got this tank of spray mixed up and you're like, well, I got to go out and get it sprayed because I've got it mixed up. That's a lot of times where you'll see some of the best responses out of adjuvants is when you just need to get it sprayed and the conditions aren't perfect every day, all day.
And when they're not, sometimes one product can help make up for the other, so to speak. But that's not something we can always rely on. I would venture a guess is my opinion on there, Kyle. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, a lot of times one of the common questions that I get around adjuvants is, so you can enhance the uptake of a pesticide by using an adjuvant. Well, why don't I just use more of the pesticide? What's the real benefit to using an adjuvant? And I would say the answer to that is kind of twofold. The first one is that there's a legal label limit, so you can't just keep putting more and more pesticide out to try to offset what doesn't get in the plant. And the other side of it too is that when conditions are not favorable for uptake, for sure you can put more actual active ingredient out, but the problem is that when you put more out, you still have less uptake. So it's kind of like a means to an end. I heard someone explain this once, and maybe you guys use this analogy in North Dakota too, but it's kind of like saying, when the fence is broken, do you just keep putting more cattle out in the pasture in hopes that less of them get out, or do you just fix the fence?
Right, exactly. Because
Sorry, kids are home from school today.
don't you worry. Okay, for those who can't see on the live stream, Kyle's kids are having a fantastic time photobombing him in the background, and the rest of us are loving it. If I'd have known, I'd have hidden Easter eggs in my office to go search for them too while you guys aren't looking.
Yeah,
That
I
would've
know.
been
I'm laughing.
perfect.
They're sitting here doing an Easter egg hunt as we're talking here.
Well, if they happen to find any AMS for your spray tanks, maybe they should let you know.
Maybe they'll find a jug of oil adjuvant in here somewhere too.
Just wouldn't be surprised. So, kind of a sidebar to our topic for farmers. Justin and I are pretty avid gardeners. Can we use things like that in our home gardens for better weed control or better uptake with, say, our fungicides to prevent things like wilt in our cucumbers, etc.? Is that also a possibility?
You can. It's kind of a side conversation. Probably one of the things that, anytime you purchase like any kind of a product, be it a herbicide or a fungicide or an insecticide, probably one of the things that I always recommend people do is whether it's for home and garden, as you're talking about, Bridgette, or you're a farmer who's 10,000 acres and you're buying product to spray on your wheat. The best thing I would recommend doing is just make sure you look at a label, because the label will tell you what adjuvants they recommend and what works best. I will admit, for home and garden, to your question, Bridgette, can they be used? They can. Oftentimes adjuvants are manufactured and packaged for bigger, acreage sizes. So that's one thing to definitely keep in mind, is that if you do want to buy an adjuvant for your home and garden, you're talking maybe a tenth of an acre, maybe half an acre, maybe an acre, you might end up having about 50 years worth of adjuvants if you're not careful on what package size you buy. So there's probably a conversation there that, does it work for home and garden? For sure it does. Just make sure you're buying the right package size for how much you're going to need it.
And Kyle,
Justin and I can split a jug.
Yeah, there you go. You haven't seen her garden. And Kyle, what I don't know if you have the numbers, but are there more in our ag community using the adjuvants, like, let's say, over the last 10 years than previously?
It's funny that you asked that. I was actually just looking at the last 10 years of adjuvant information. This is just internal to Land O'Lakes and Winfield United. And I would say that, for example, our oil adjuvant numbers are up nationwide, somewhere between, 10 and 30%, just depending upon how you crunch the numbers. And I would say that water conditioner wise, I'd say, just across the board, adjuvants are getting used more now than they were 10 years ago. I think there's getting to be better understanding of how they work, why they work, where they work. Now, one thing that we're all blessed with here is, we've got two great land grant universities, SDSU and NDSU, that do a lot of really good applied research looking at adjuvant usage. And I think that really helps us understand how we can use adjuvants, because, when I think about where adjuvants really get used more, and they get used, think of it almost like a Swiss Army knife. It's up here in the Dakotas, Western Minnesota, this geography where, a lot of times we don't start spraying until early April. And a lot of times we spray until, sometimes we can go into November. And when we start thinking about spraying in cool, wet conditions, or heck, I'm sure you're all familiar with it too. You can have a summer day where one day it's 80 degrees and the next day it might be 50 or even, 45 degrees and cloudy. We just keep spraying right through that. I think that's part of the reason why in our geography we see so much more adjuvant knowledge, usage, and adoption, is because we just have to rely on them so much more because our environment is so much more variable.
I would agree with that. Things change so very much and so quickly. And speaking of change, it's 1:31 in the afternoon. We need to make a slight change, but we're going to come right back with Kyle Gustafson. He is our adjuvant expert today. We're going to talk about pesticides and tank mixing and get farmers ready to go to the field soon. So we'll be right back. Oh, and welcome back. That's the noise Dean makes when we leave him all alone in the studio for the day.
The old screaming goat.
Well, you could be making that noise because you're so excited to dash out and get yourself some North Dakota Sweet Crude. Sweet Crude, if you haven't tasted it, or the Sweet Crude Orange, well, that's a smooth cinnamon and spice flavor. They are a great drink, especially this time of the year as we're getting into spring. This week on April 5th, you can have samples in Detroit Lakes at their beer festival at the Freeman Arena, also at Cashwise Liquors on Moorhead, on Highway 10 in Moorhead. So check them out. That's North Dakota Sweet Crude. You can find lots of recipes at crudespirits.com.
Oh
Please
my
do.
God!
And that follow us right along with mortonbuildings.com/careers. You want to go there if you're thinking about that. Oh my God, it's a moment in time. I want to change my career. Morton Buildings has a place for you. So check them out as well. Meanwhile, today we have the great pleasure of having a guest with us, and that is Kyle Gustafson. He is with Land O'Lakes. He is our Tankmix Adjuvant expert, and we were talking about all things to get ready for spring. All right, Kyle, like you were just saying, weather's going to change. It's warming up. We have weeds emerging. As I drove home yesterday up I-29, I saw henbit all over in Nebraska and Missouri, etc. What weeds are you starting to see emerge, and what's your concern? I mean, for me personally, I'm thinking about kochia, and I'm thinking about adding oils to my burn downs to make sure I control that early season kochia. What's your thoughts?
There's probably two weeds, Bridgette, that I get worried about this time of year as the world starts to warm up. Number one is kochia. You nailed that one right on the head. And probably the thing that concerns me about kochia is it's twofold. The first one is that if you've ever pulled a kochia plant and you look at it really carefully, it's got tons of hair on its leaves. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, because you think of like if while you're showering, what's the reason why we put soap in our hair? Well, it's to help clean our hair and clean our scalp, right? It's the same conversation we have with spray droplets, where you have to put surfactants with spray droplets, because if you don't put a surfactant with the water, what'll end up happening is the spray droplets will just land on that kochia plant's hair, and it just evaporates, and that active ingredient will never actually get physically into the leaves to do its job. So the first one is the hair piece. The second one is that if you're an agronomist, or even you're just a farmer that's kind of curious, and when you start taking a look at kochia that gets to be 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches tall, just pull a kochia plant that's 6 inches tall and just count the number of growing points. You might be surprised to find 20, 30, even more growing points if it's a shorter statured plant. And you got to remember that your herbicide has to hit every one of those growing points to actually kill the kochia plant. So as that kochia grows, it gets to be a lot harder to control. So to your point, kochia is probably my number one weed that I would say is a challenge. And the other problem is you think about, so today is April 1, so it's April Fool's Day, right? So in South Dakota, we normally will start planting corn in another 2 to 3 weeks. Soybeans are probably 3 to 4 weeks away. And a lot of times what people will do is they'll go out and they'll spray pre-emergent herbicides for their corn or for their soybeans. And they say, well, I'm just going to do a burn down with it. That's a great idea. The problem with it is, even by that point, if we get some warm weather between now and then, we're going to have kochia that's probably 6 inches minimum. It might even be taller. So it's one of those things to just start thinking about is, start looking at your fields, start looking at your weeds, because, one of the things, and Bridgette, I know you and I have talked about this many times, is, most labels say it's about 4-inch tall weeds. That's about the height of a 12-inch beverage can. And yet, as the weeds get taller than that 12-ounce beverage can, they're technically off label. So you want to get them sprayed before they get that tall. The other weed, Bridgette, that I always get concerned about, and this one's a little more local, but it's very real for a lot of our farmers that work with no-till, is mare's tail. So mare's tail is a weed that comes up early. And what I get concerned about mare's tail is actually what we called a winter annual plant, meaning that it actually started growing last fall. Over the winter, it goes dormant, and then in the springtime, it bolts and it grows, upright very fast. And that's the problem with like a mare's tail plant. Same conversation as you have with kochia, but it grows very, very fast. And especially with mare's tail, as it gets over about 4 to 6 inches tall, it gets really, really hard to control. So for anyone out there that's no-till that deals with mare's tail, it might seem counterintuitive to think, gosh, I don't want to go out and spray that mare's tail when it's only 3 inches tall, because I'm going to be turning around in a week or two and I'm going to be spraying my pre-emergent herbicide for my soybeans. That might be the best money that you spend, though, now to get that mare's tail under control while it's small, versus waiting until it gets bigger and then hoping you can control it.
And that's just it. We can't ever do that. Hope we can control it. And you heard us in our opening segment say some of our favorite things to talk about are beef and beer. So Justin and I were talking about beer before. And that's where that 12-ounce beer can is exactly right. That's a great measurement for the size of weeds that you want to control. It's got to be shorter than your beer can, or your Coke can or whatever it is that you're drinking. And ideally it should be shot glass size. I mean, that's a visual I use when I talk to farmers, is that's a relevant idea of what you should be looking for. And in our visits in the background, as we're sending each other messages, Justin was like, well, how big does kosher really get? And he found some really awesome pictures. And no, those are not short people standing next to it. So Kyle, what's the worst you've seen?
This is my favorite story to tell. Is I was out in Pierre, South Dakota about 10 years ago, and we got in this conversation around growing points on kochia. And one of the local co-op's interns, I handed them this kochia plant that was about waist high on me, so it was probably about 3 foot tall. And I said, start counting the growing points. And they made it, I think they made it to about inch 6 or 7, and they were at like 85 growing points. You know, and so you think about that on a bush-sized kochia plant, they made it to about there, and they were already at 80 growing points. And so, I mean, you think about it, this is purely my speculation, is I'm guessing there was 300 to 400 growing points minimum on that 3 foot kochia plant. And I just always think about that, when people talk about spraying for pasture control, or, I mean, you guys can imagine when people are out trying to spray these kochia plants that are 3 foot tall, and they say, what can I use that will work on them? I'm just like, oh boy. I mean, I go back to that and I think you've got hundreds of growing points you've got to hit. I mean, the chances of you controlling that weed it's less than 1%. So, I mean, it goes back to this conversation about really trying to manage weeds when they're small is so much easier than when they get big and out of control.
Well, there's actually a point that last year, several of us as consultants literally told farmers, don't even try to spray that patch of kochia or water hemp. It was too big. It was too late in the season. It was set in seed. You were better off to combine around it, come back later, mow it, or do something to destroy the plants. Because if you tried to spray it, all you do is try to promote resistance. Then you will have, and if you try to go through it with a combine, you're just going to get seeds in your combine to spread around the field. None of that is a good idea.
Speaking from a weed science perspective, Bridgette, we say excellent weed control is generally over 90%. Very good is 80 to 90%. But that good to fair that people talk about, that's only 60 to 75% control. And to your point, Bridgette, there's a lot of herbicides that when those weeds get over, 6 inches tall, for sure, as they get over a foot tall, that percent control drops to 50% or under. And there's a real conversation that needs to be had there that, look, if you go out and spray it, you're only going to get 40 to 50% weed control, which is a failure. You're probably going to be unhappy anyways. Are you sure you even want to be spraying those weeds? Because to your point, there's a bigger conversation around resistance that's happening here too, that,
yes,
I mean, it might make you feel good that you drop the seed population for the next 12 months, but your chances of developing resistance goes way up as you talk those big weeds, and you might have a point in 4, 5 years, maybe less, maybe more, when you can no longer use that herbicide because the weeds are resistant because we were trying to spray them when they were too big.
Well, I am of the scorched earth policy myself. So if I think that something's about to get out of control, if it's in that 4 to 6 inch range, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to get it sprayed in time. I am definitely going out there with a methylated seed oil or crop oil or something. Why would I go to an oil-based product like that, Kyle? I mean, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but especially if I want to get through that waxy cuticle on a kochia or a water hemp, what does that do for me as a farmer?
For sure. You just nailed it, Bridgette. So there are herbicides out there that are oil-loving herbicides. I think of Sharpen or Flexstar, or even some of the lesser-known oil-loving herbicides, the Group 14, so sulfentrazone or Valor, or even like 2,4-D. Those are herbicides that benefit because when you put an oil adjuvant out, it melts that waxy cuticle and it allows the herbicide to penetrate physically into the leaves faster. And kind of a fun fact, when we talk about, what kind of oil do we like to use in this geography, we use methylated seed oil because, believe it or not, it was developed right in Fargo at NDSU. And it was developed for these conditions that we deal with. It gets hot, it gets dry, the plants put a waxy cuticle cuticle on them. That oil, you put that oil out with your herbicide, it melts that wax so it can get the herbicide into the plant, so it can get through the wax. I talked about kochia, it can get through the hairs. That gives you the best chance of getting good herbicide uptake so that the herbicide can do its job, get to the growing point, and work on that weed as it's intended to work.
Oh, that is absolutely the truth and wonderful advice. And so, Kyle, if people have been listening to this conversation and they're thinking, I'd like to ask more questions, do you want them to go find us over on Twitter? Would you rather that they reach out to me with the questions and I can funnel them to you? Any suggestions on how you'd like to handle anything that may come around?
Bridgette, I actually like that suggestion. If you have questions around adjuvants, funnel them to Bridgette. Bridgette and I have a good working relationship. Bridgette can ask me the questions, and I can make sure I get people's questions answered. A good source of information is your local retailer and your extension service. Check that to start with. When it comes to questions you have, and if you have deeper questions, funnel them to Bridgette, and I can make sure I get questions answered back again.
All right. Thank you, Kyle Gustafson, for spending some time with us to visit about adjuvants. Dean and Justin, sorry, guys. I know that this is probably something where you're going, what? But it's weather related. Adjuvants matter in the weather. So, all right. We will come back to wrap up the weather. We'll talk about some headlines, and we want you to stay tuned for Cheyenne Garden Trivia because Justin's got something to give away. We'll be back right after this.
And welcome back to Weather and Ag in Focus. Thanks for rejoining the program at 1:51 on this Monday afternoon. And, well, we still got a couple ag topics and a check on the forecast to come. But first, we need to do Cheyenne Gardens trivia. And if you're the first person to call in with the correct answer to 701-293-9000, that's the Red Wing Shoes phone line, win yourself a $10 certificate to Cheyenne Gardens, just 10 minutes north of Fargo. And you can use that anytime after the 15th of April when they're open. So your trivia question for today is, I am a flower, but I am technically 1 to 2,000 individual flowers. What am I? Any thoughts, guys? I know you can't say,
Sounds
but does anything
intriguing.
come to mind?
What's the question again?
So I am a flower, but the center of my flower is actually 1 to 2,000 individual flowers.
You're a flower, but the center of your flower is 1 to 2,000 individual flowers?
That is correct. It's only making you scratch your head a little bit, I'm thinking.
Yeah, because I'm
'Cause I
thinking
have
about like
no
the seed
idea.
head. I'm thinking about the seed head on a rhubarb plant, but that doesn't quite work. I mean, that's the flowering part of the rhubarb, but that's not classified as a flower.
701-293-9000 if you know the answer for that and have a chance to win that gift certificate.
Again, that trivia question is, I am a singular flower, but the center of my flower contains 1 to 2,000 individual flowers.
All right, we've got a couple callers here. So let's go to line 1. Can I get your name, caller?
Rocky.
Rocky, welcome to Weather and Ag in Focus. Do you think you have the answer?
Sunflower.
Sunflower
Bingo.
is right. Okay, Rocky, did you have to Google it or did you know it?
No, I knew that one.
Awesome. Good deal. I never knew that.
I know Rocky, so just put his name down. I can pick up his certificate and deliver it to him.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Rocky, we're going to put you on hold. Should we get his information, Bridgette, or do you want?
Yeah, get his information, and I'll pick it up when I'm in studio. Yes.
All right, Rocky, hold on, and our producer Addison he'll get your information from you.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, Rocky. All
right. It's a little interesting one. Yeah. Sunflower is not just one flower. The sunflower is huge, but the head of the fuzzy brown center actually contains 1 to 2,000 individual flowers. Each of those individual flowers will produce a sunflower seed.
Interesting.
You know, if I was going to give a hint, I was going to say that it's a favorite of blackbirds because the bird population in North Dakota, especially eastern North Dakota, really decimated that industry. So many acres moved to the west where there were less blackbirds. And when you get around the Devil's Lake area, it's perfect habitat because there's water, there's sunflowers for food, there's great nesting areas. And so the blackbirds have really been the biggest problem for some of the sunflower acres in the state of North Dakota, even besides, problems with white mold or anything like that.
They should have put more scarecrows out. What were they thinking?
I guess we didn't have bird flu right then to wipe out a few things now, did we?
Lord.
So there.
We didn't have bird flu to wipe out all the blackbirds.
Yes. Speaking of which, so there have been 5 states have had dairy herds that have confirmed bird flu in their dairy animals. I know we had a little bit of a chat about this earlier, you guys. No, that doesn't mean that your milk will make you fly or anything crazy like that.
Matey.
So instead, it is not affecting any of your dairy products. But yes, there have been 5 states that now have had confirmation of bird flu in dairy animals. There was also 1 goat in Minnesota that died. Wonder if it was our screaming goat. But anywho, that goat.
He's still screaming.
Yeah, that's him.
Not dead yet.
The screaming. The goat in Minnesota was on a farm where there had been a commercial flock that had to be euthanized due to bird flu. So there are some things that can happen. Bird flu, from what I understand, has the potential to affect 200 different species or 200 different mammals. So it can in fact happen, but it's not going to affect us in a negative impact through our dairy products. There you go.
Are you sure?
Keep drinking your milk.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are you sure we shouldn't go
the best
start,
information I've got.
Piling up in case of a dairy shortage, like the whole toilet paper thing a couple years ago?
You
You're
can buy
saying
and
don't
freeze as much
start a
cheese as
panic?
you'd like. Get all your cheese stockpile the milk. Feel free. Dairy farmers appreciate all that buying.
Right.
There we go. There we go. Well, I think we need to check on the forecast. We got a couple of nice days on the way and nice pleasant temperatures returning to the valley. Dean, when are we going to see those pleasant temperatures over spreading the region?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're already seeing increasing sunshine in the FM area that will spread southward as well for the rest of the afternoon. Temperatures today pretty close to the 50-degree mark across much of the area with light winds. That's not a bad afternoon. Tonight, a few clouds down to about 30, maybe a sprinkle or flurry possible, but most areas remaining dry. And then as we head into your Tuesday, we're looking at breezier conditions out of the northwest, developing 10 to 25, partly cloudy, highs upper 40s to right around 50. More sunshine midweek and Thursday and Friday with warming temperatures. By the end of the week, we're in the mid to upper 50s, and then we should be right around 60 for the upcoming weekend. But it is going to be windy.
Bad hair day,
How
boys.
windy is windy?
Windy indeed.
Windy indeed.
Like you might
Oh,
blow
my.
into the other county, so
Holy moly, you're saying it's not a very good ultralight flying day then.
probably not.
Oh, shit.
Probably not.
There goes that next new hobby and how to get to work, the ultralight. So you don't have to
The
drive down the
ultralight.
interstate. You can just
There you
I'm just
float down.
gonna get the box fan and strap it on a backpack and get a parachute and just
There you go.
gonna jump up and ride the thermals.
Oh, nice. Well, let's see how it goes. All right.
Gonna go great.
It's probably going to go better than some of the tax situations that are going to happen for farmers right now in order to try to balance the budget. There are some decisions that are being made about making some changes in tax code, things that are proposed for farmers. The 1031 exchange, that deferral would now be limited to $500,000 versus what it was previously. Capital gains on amounts over $1 million to be taxed at 37% and higher. That could happen if you have a farmer retire coming into income and then having significant capital gains on selling equipment or herd dispersals. So keep those things in mind.
37%? You kidding?
Hang on till tomorrow. We'll be able to
Holy-
visit then. The Jay Thomas Show is next.